Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Putin and Zelenskyy agreed to begin negotiations to end the war in Ukraine after the two speak separately with President Trump. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi prepares for talks at the White House with trade and immigration on the agenda. Hamas agreed to hand over 3 Israeli hostages as agreed this Saturday, keeping the terms of the ceasefire deal. And at least 28 people are injured in a suspected attack in Munich after an Afghan asylum seeker rams a car into a group of people in Germany. To our top story, and President Trump says both Ukraine and Russia have agreed to start peace negotiations after holding phone calls with both leaders. The US president spoke with Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy separately as the two countries attempt to end the war, which has rumbled on for almost 3 years. But the US President Donald Trump is facing backlash over his push for peace in Ukraine. There are accusations he's betraying Kyiv by giving concessions to Russia before negotiations have formally begun. Nick Harper reports from Washington.
After almost 3 years of fighting, there's now, very suddenly, progress towards peace. President Donald Trump speaking to the leaders of Russia and Ukraine just hours apart.
I think President Putin wants peace and President Zelenskyy wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed.
At the same time, President Trump's Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, told NATO allies it was unrealistic to expect Russia to hand back captured Ukrainian territory. And that's causing concern in Kyiv.
It looks like Ukraine has been betrayed. In what is being said now, in all the rhetorics, I do not see anything good for Ukraine. This is very sad.
What Trump's plans are is to rob Ukraine of as much as possible, not to make peace here.
The US Defense Secretary, though, says that's not the case.
There is no betrayal there. There is a recognition that the whole world and the United States is invested and interested in peace, a negotiated peace.
But in its push for peace, the US is also ruling out NATO membership for Ukraine. And President Trump wants Ukraine to part with mineral resources, specifically rare earths, that the US needs for high-tech industries. In return, Washington would supply Kyiv with weapons and security guarantees. But President Zelenskyy says Ukraine must be part of negotiations.
It's important that everything does not go according to Putin's plan, in which he wants to do everything to make his negotiations bilateral between him and the United States of America. We, as a sovereign country, simply will not be able to accept any agreements without us.
It remains unclear what Russia might be asked to concede, if anything, as part of a negotiated peace. Talks are expected to start on Friday in Munich, headed up on the US side by Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
We can now go live to Moscow to speak to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, thank you so much for joining me. A lot has been going on, but President Trump has said he'll work closely with Vladimir Putin to wind down the conflict and stop the millions of deaths. How has this conversation actually gone down in Moscow?
Well, Moscow was surprised by how the Trump administration is now treating this issue, and Moscow does say that it is interested in maintaining this dialogue. The numerous politicians who have been speaking about this phone call between the two have all said that it is a historic phone call because this is the first step in normalizing ties between Moscow and Washington. We are also hearing from the Russian side that they are now going to form the negotiating group that will be be responsible for talks with the United States when it comes to the settlement in Ukraine. That is also a very important step forward. Russia has admitted that these preparations have already started. And at the same time, we understand the sides have agreed that it is time for both to work together. And actually, they have agreed that any long-term settlement for the conflict in Ukraine can be achieved only through negotiated solutions. So many important movements taking place at this stage. And obviously, Moscow welcomes any possibility to have a negotiated solution, but keeps in mind that Moscow will be looking for its national interest to be preserved and to be addressed when it comes to any solution for Ukraine, saying that the so-called root causes of this conflict, and particularly the NATO eastwards expansion, have to be addressed.
Yes, indeed. Dasha, President Trump has said negotiations have started, but Europe appears to not really be in the conversation at the moment. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has been speaking in the last hour or so. He says we need to put Ukraine in the best possible position. How likely are they to join this conversation?
Well, at this stage, we understand the format of the negotiations is still being worked out, because this is very early to say about the timing, about the venue, when these negotiations will be starting. And therefore, the Kremlin has said that it is unclear which parties could also be involved and if they will be involved in such negotiations. But at the same time, Moscow has said also very strongly that it remembers the so-called eloquent experience that it had in 2015 while negotiating with France and Germany the Minsk Accords. And in those talks, Moscow says it believes it has been betrayed and actually lied to, because the understanding at this stage is that back then those accords that were supposed to bring the end to the fighting in Ukraine against Donbas, they were just signed to drag time and to for Western countries to have time to arm Ukraine. So this is the view from Moscow. Therefore, Moscow insists that when it comes to the involvement of other countries, Moscow will remember that experience.
Dasha, Trump and Putin have actually agreed to meet in person, which will be historic, because I think it was actually been a long time since, I think Obama was the last person to actually meet Vladimir Putin. But will Putin travel to the White House? Will Trump travel to the Kremlin? Or will they meet in Saudi first?
Well, that is certainly the understanding that would be a miracle coming to life if any of the presidents actually travel to the other country, Trump to Russia or Putin to the United States. However, the understanding is very strong that they are preparing also the face-to-face. The summit could be taking place in a third country. We understand that Riyadh was regarded as one of the possibilities for such a meeting. That's according to the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. However, no venue has been chosen so far, and there are other options on the table as well. But what is important at this very stage is that they have agreed it is time to work together. They have the responsible teams that are now starting the preparations for maintaining those contacts, be it through the phone conversation and eventually preparing the summit. The Russian presidential spokesman has also stressed that there is the sense in Russia that such a summit should be arranged promptly, and therefore the work has already started.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you so much for joining me. Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Washington today to meet with US President Donald Trump. The leaders are looking to boost ties between the world's two largest democracies. But the visit comes amid concerns about Trump's tariff action and mass deportation of illegal immigrants. India is expected to ease some tariffs to win over Trump's favour. Rebecca Bundahan has more from Mumbai.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Donald Trump really enjoyed warm relations during his first term as US President. And with a meeting this early in Trump's second presidency. The two leaders are really hoping that they can renew that bond. Trade, energy, defence and technology are all areas in which the two countries will be looking to boost cooperation. They do have strong bilateral ties, and these have only been strengthening over the years. The two countries share concerns over China's rising assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. But Mr. Trump has described India as the tariff king in the past and called the country a big abuser of tariffs. And what Mr. Modi will really be hoping for from this visit is that he can perhaps try to avoid becoming a direct target of President Trump's tariff action. And India, in its recently announced annual budget, did actually cut some tariffs on products including high-end motorcycles. This was something that was seen as a preemptive move, and it's expected that India could cut tariffs in other sectors, including electronics and medical equipment, to make Mr. Trump happy. Immigration is another issue that is going to be high up on the agenda during this visit of Mr. Modi to the United States. There are some concerns among Indians about Mr. Trump's efforts to end birthright citizenship for temporary visa holders, which could affect some Indians. And this also comes as there is a political row in India over the treatment of deported Indians who were accused of entering the US illegally, and they were sent back on a flight, some of them last week, more than 100 people, and they were shackled on this US military flight.
Rebecca Bundahan in Mumbai, thank you. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has begun a trip to Europe and the Middle East. He's in Germany today to participate in the Munich Security Conference and the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting. He'll then visit Israel, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to discuss the Gaza ceasefire with senior officials. 250 people from 20 nationalities working in scam centres in Myanmar's Karen state have been freed. The workers, who are mainly from Africa or Asia, were handed over to the Thai army by one of the armed groups who control the area. They are now being assessed to find out if they are victims of human trafficking. Their release comes after the Thai Prime Minister promised to shut down the centres along the Thai-Myanmar border. A suspected gas explosion at a department store in Taiwan has killed at least 4 people and left 26 injured. The blast in Taichung happened on the 12th floor of the building where construction work was taking place. The fire department says tourists from Macau were involved in the incident. Now, a terrifying moment involving a driver narrowly escaping a crash with a train in Utah has been caught on camera. The footage released by the Utah Transit Authority shows a driver escaping from the car just seconds before the train smashes into it. The vehicle got stuck on the train crossing after being hit on the tracks by a pickup truck. Local media say luckily no one was injured. Hamas has said it will release the Israeli hostages as planned this Saturday and will carry out the Gaza ceasefire deal. The group had previously threatened to delay the next stage of handovers after it accused Israel of failing to meet its obligations. Israel and Hamas will start negotiating the second stage of the deal imminently, which could see the truce extended and all Israeli troops withdrawn from Gaza. I'm now joined by Laura Blumenfeld, former senior policy advisor on the US State Department's Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team and now a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University. Laura, lovely to have you on. Thank you for joining me. First of all, a Hamas delegation is in Cairo for talks with Qatar and Egypt on the Gaza ceasefire, and mediators appear to have succeeded in salvaging the hostage release on Saturday. Laura, is this a positive signal that the deal is now possibly back on track?
Absolutely. I mean, the ceasefire ship has been steadied. It was only after Trump threatened to blow it out of the water. But what President Trump managed to do this week was something that, the previous president would have loved to take credit for, which is he got Israel and Hamas on the same page. They are literally in the same ship right now, the Israelis and Hamas, because both of them want to see their people let free, whether it's Israelis who are being held hostage or Palestinians who are prisoners in Israel. So they both have something to gain. And when President Trump raised the stakes like that, I think both of them at the same time said, whoa, steady.
There appears to be a little bit of confusion clouding the ceasefire deal, however, with both Israel and Hamas blaming each other for violating the agreement. What will mediators be working on behind the scenes right now?
Well, I think that they were sort of minor breaks relatively and not a material breach. The truth is, again, Hamas is feeling incredible pressure. Gaza is in rubble right now. Gaza is gone. But releasing those prisoners was one of the major goals of Al-Aqsa flood starting on October 7th. This is something tangible that they can deliver. And the same thing for the Israelis. I mean, there will be no sort of looking forward or beyond October 7th until they bring their people home. There's tremendous domestic pressure on Netanyahu. The ceasefire is popular. So I think that those mediators, it's fascinating, I think, that Egypt and Qatar now are sort of considered the moderating voices. In the past, in the previous administration, it might have been Biden with his byword. He would always say, de-escalate, de-escalate. Now we have a president of the United States who's all for escalation. It's a totally different way of going about it, but as long as we can get to that hostage release and prisoner release, things are on track. The one thing I am concerned about, though, what we missed the opportunity for this week with all the drama and fog surrounding Saturday's release is we didn't start negotiating the second phase. And that's really what's going to bring about the end of war and looking forward to a better tomorrow.
Yes, I was going to actually ask you about the second phase and where we could possibly see that going. Any ideas?
Well, it's just fascinating with this new U.S. president. He's injecting a whole different, substance into the talks. He likes outrage. And I'm not sure when you mix that into the Middle East kettle, what we're going to come up with. But he is impatient. He's radiating impatience, and he's trying to sort of compress the hostage release. Netanyahu would like to see an extension of phase one to get more hostages out. So they're both, coming at it with different approaches. Ultimately, though, it's up to Hamas. They hold the keys.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was prepared to resume intense fighting this weekend if the hostages weren't returned. As you did say, Hamas, that's what they're dealing with at the moment. But Gaza is in rubble. Do you think Netanyahu is gaining confidence amid Donald Trump's backing and all these threats that we've been talking about?
Yeah, confidence is definitely the word of the week. Certainly, when Donald Trump was asked why he's sort of a different kind of president than he was last time, he used that exact word. He said confidence. I think we have to be careful, though, with Netanyahu of overconfidence, of overplaying your hand, because at the end of the day, he needs to bring his people back. I remember when I worked at the State Department, one of our talking points was the status quo is unsustainable. We were talking under President Obama about a two-state solution to both Palestinians and Israelis. I think today that talking point is no longer just empty rhetoric. It really is unsustainable. And hopefully that kind of urgency will put things on track all the way.
So do you think a two-state solution is still actually possible, Laura?
Well, I didn't mean to jump ahead, sort of to the end game here. It's clear that with President Trump talking, he calls it an out-of-the-box idea. Others say it's out of your mind. Again, what he's managed to do is unite the Arab world in rejecting that idea, which I think is fine as long as it keeps this sort of conversation going and spurs more creative ideas. We already have a summit scheduled between the Egyptians and the Jordanians, and Saudi Arabia is going to play a key role here because there are kings in President Trump's mind, and then there are kings, all caps. And for him, I think Saudi Arabia is really the all-cap kings. I see there's kind of a deference he has toward the Saudis. They share a lot of the same goals and even worldviews. It's about nationalism and techno-optimism. They see AI as a solution for economic problems. And for both of those leaderships, it's really all about the economy. There's Vision 2030 for Saudi Arabia, and for Donald Trump, it's Make America Great Again.
Laura Blumenfeld, former senior policy advisor on the U.S. State Department's Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. One person has died and at least 3 others are wounded after a suicide attack on the Afghan Ministry of Urban Development and Housing earlier today. A Taliban government spokesman confirmed security forces shot the attacker and another person was killed as a result of the explosion. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for the incident. Western tour agencies have started visiting North Korea today, and that's for the first time since the COVID pandemic. Last month, travel companies said the city of Rason would reopen to foreign tourists 5 years after Pyongyang sealed its borders. Despite not being fully open yet, with only a special trip for staff, Rason is hoping to welcome visitors in the coming days. Now, Elon Musk has confirmed he is partnering with Dubai authorities to create an underground road network in the city. Musk, who has built a similar traffic system in Las Vegas, announced the plans at the World Government Summit in Dubai. Passengers would be asked to pay a fee to drive down one-way tunnels. It's hoped they would fix traffic jams in the city, which is home to nearly 3.6 million people. And Hollywood icon Audrey Hepburn will be honoured with a blue plaque in London's Mayfair. The Oscar-winning actress, who starred in Roman Holiday and Breakfast at Tiffany's, attended boarding school in England. Other stars being honoured include glam rock musician Mark Bolan, ballerina Alicia Markova, and novelist Barbara Pym. At least 28 people, including children, have been injured after a car rammed into a group of people in Munich earlier today. German police say the driver was a 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker who drove at speed and was detained at the scene. The incident is not believed to be related to the Munich Security Conference taking place in this city tomorrow, where world leaders, including Ukraine's President Zelenskyy and US Vice President J.D. Vance, are expected. Earlier today, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz had a warning for those who break the law.
It is very important for me to send the message that anyone who commits crimes in Germany will not only be severely punished and sent to prison, but must also expect that they will not be able to continue their stay in Germany. And this also applies to countries where it is very difficult to repatriate someone. It is to be feared that it will not remain without consequences for all wounded, and that is something we will all carry around with us. So once again, from my point of view, it is quite clear. This attacker cannot count on any mercy. He must be punished and he must leave the country.
Our correspondent Trent Murray is live from Munich now. Trent, police detained a 24-year-old suspect at the scene. What more do we know about the incident that took place today?
Yeah, that's right, Leigh Ann. That incident occurred exactly where we are standing, just behind me there. The kind of investigation stage has now wrapped up, and we've seen the fire crews here hosing off the road and cleaning up the remaining of the debris. That is after that incident occurred at 10:30 a.m. local time, when eyewitnesses say that that driver, that 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker, put his foot down on the accelerator and drove straight into the crowd of people that were here. Now, as you said, 28 people have been injured, including a mother and her small child. We understand that several people here tried to actually open the door of the car to get in to apprehend this man, but they weren't able to. Police opened fire, smashing one of the windows, and then were able to detain him. We are being told his name is Farhad N. We're not allowed to say his surname under German privacy laws. He is now under arrest and in police custody as that investigation takes place.
Trent, a similar incident took place in Magdeburg just before Christmas. 5 people, including a 9-year-old, did die. How are authorities treating this kind of attack, which seems to have been repeated?
Yeah, well, I think you heard it there from the Chancellor when he used some pretty tough language. I mean, I've followed Chancellor Scholz for all of his years in office, and I don't think I've ever heard him speak that tough, saying the person needs to leave the country. I think there is a very real understanding that after this spate of attacks that we've seen in Germany, not just in Magdeburg, in Solingen, where there was a stabbing spree back in August, Mannheim, where there was another stabbing spree and a police officer died. I think for German politicians, they're acutely aware that this is now becoming a real issue, especially politically. We are now less than a week away from elections here. Immigration remains the top issue of concern, according to all of the polls. And I think what we have seen here now in Munich will undoubtedly probably affect the campaign trail already. We've seen a lot of politicians speak about toughening up the laws to try and make sure that these types of incidents don't take place.
Yes, absolutely. Authorities are ruling out a link to the Munich Security Conference, which does take place tomorrow. We know that high-powered individuals are arriving, but is there any link, do you think, as you mentioned, to this upcoming German elections and the rise of the right-wing AfD party?
Well, look, it's quite difficult to say. I mean, what we know was that the crowd of people here, there was around 1,000 of them, were actually taking part in a trade union sort of protest and march. They were staff members from the city's hospitals and municipality buildings, and that is why there was such a large crowd here. The union, of course, has put out its sympathies and its statement, but in terms of the wider election, we're not quite sure yet of the motivation, frankly speaking. We don't know whether he was just happened to be driving past this big rally that was taking place, whether he had planned it in advance, knowing that it would happen. That's all going to form part of the investigation. But what I think I can say with certainty is that what has happened here is now going to be front and centre over the next 7 days of this election campaign. And you're going to see politicians right across the spectrum, but particularly from the AfD, really try and use this event, I think, to call for stronger law and order and also border security.
Trent Murray in Munich, thank you so much for joining me. Let's take a look at the top business news now. The UK economy surprisingly grew during the final 3 months of 2024. Official figures show it expanded by 0.1% in the last quarter and 0.4% in December alone. It's a boost for the Chancellor Rachel Reeves on her birthday after zero growth in the previous 3 months. Honda and Nissan's merger talks have collapsed after the firms failed to agree on a multi-billion-dollar tie-up. The Japanese car makers had aimed to combine their businesses to fight back against competition from rival companies, especially in China. The merger would have created an auto group worth $60 billion. Let's go to sports now, and the Merseyside derby at Goodison Park was a night to remember as Everton earned a 2-2 draw with Liverpool just in the final minutes. But it sparked chaotic scenes as fans spilled onto the pitch after the final whistle. Liverpool head coach Arne Slot and his assistant were also sent off for confronting the referee. Everton boss David Moyes said it was mayhem all game, an old-fashioned throwback. And Celtic clawed back a goal against Bayern Munich to keep their hopes of reaching the Champions League last 16 alive. Michael Olise and Harry Kane scored either side of the break for Bayern, putting them in command. However, just 11 minutes from time, Dyson Maeda did a header for Celtic and ended the game 2-1. And a reminder of our stories. Putin and Zelenskyy agree to begin negotiations to end the war in Ukraine after the two speak separately with President Donald Trump. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi prepares for talks at the White House with trade and immigration on the agenda. Hamas agreed to hand over 3 Israeli hostages as agreed this Saturday, keeping to the terms of the ceasefire deal. And at least 28 people are injured in a suspected attack in Munich after an Afghan asylum seeker rams a car into a group of people in Germany. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. The dressing room is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burgess Watson with a GNT. Good night.